Hello, and welcome to our lecture on learning and universal design for learning. I am Kathy Shepard-Jones with the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. Okay, so as we get started, we see that we have a pen of sheep here. But wait, you aren't in the wrong place. This isn't a presentation about sheep learning. This picture of sheep is more about helping us remember back to some of our own learning experiences, both good and bad. So I'd like you to take a moment and think about your favorite teacher. What made this person stand out? Let's talk a little bit about what those good learning experiences looked like with that teacher. What are some of the characteristics of that teacher? Well, you might think that that person was really passionate about what it was that he or she was talking about. The material may have been relevant. You may have felt challenged. The material may have been interesting. Things may have been really well organized. The person who was presenting the material may have had a real connection to what it was that was being presented. Something that brought the information to life to you. Whatever it was, there was some way that the connections between that person became connections with you as well, and you were able to recognize the value, perhaps, of what it was that you were learning. There are lots of reasons that a learning experience can be a positive one, and lots of ways to enhance those opportunities. But on the flip side, you've probably also experienced a learning environment that was maybe not so conducive to having a positive experience. Think back to a teacher that was your least favorite. Think back about that experience and what made it bad. It could have just been really boring. The instructor may have been monotone, may have never changed their voice inflection, may have spoken in a very measured way. The person may have just been so connected to the information that he or she was unable to get it across to the learners. The learning experience may have been one that was very tense or felt pressured. It may have been disorganized. You may not have been challenged. You may have found information to be irrelevant. There may have been things about the room itself where the learning was taking place that made it just distracting and very difficult to learn. When I think back on my own experiences, I would have to say that a very negative experience for me was a course that I had in which the instructor came in each week and simply read from the textbook what we had been assigned the week before. There was nothing added to supplement the lecture. It was a situation where I truly felt like I did not need to be in that room. And if I was not there, I was not going to lose out on anything because it was all available to me, but nothing was added to that experience. So indeed, I felt like a sheep in a pen with no way out. So think for a minute about how much information we retain when we get it. So when we receive instruction, when we're provided training, how much do you retain when you hear something? Got any guesses? What percent would you think? Well, if you're only hearing the information, you're going to retain maybe around 20% of it. So around a fifth of the information. On the flip side, what if you see the information? What if you're reading it? What if you're looking at it on the board? If you're reading it in a book, you might retain about 30% of it on average. Now, if we go ahead and we combine the two so that you're hearing the information and you're also seeing something at the same time, then what you retain or remember is going to go up. And statistics show it's somewhere around half of that information that is going to be retained. All right, so we're making progress. If we add into that you're going to see the information, you're going to hear it, and you're also going to say the information, now that percentage jumps up to 70%. That's not bad, is it? So this is seeming to have a little bit of a pattern here of improved outcomes, of sort of the more engaged and involved the learner is, the better the retention of the materials. So what do you think the best way to retain the most information is? All right, so if you're going to see it, hear it, say it, and have an opportunity to do something, then you could retain up to as much of about 90% of the information. So this is really talking about an engaged learner. This learner is really participating, and a result of that participation means that much information is going to be held on to and not forgotten necessarily. So what this says to me is that by presenting information in a variety of different ways and giving a learner an opportunity to be involved in different ways, you are increasing that person's chances for success. That's pretty powerful, I think. So now I would like to show you a short video, and it'll give you a different perspective, maybe make you think a little bit differently about learning and the way that our world is changing very rapidly. Did you know if you're 1 in a million in China, there are 1,300 people just like you. China will soon become the #1 English-speaking country in the world. The 25% of India's population with the highest IQs is greater than the total population of the United States. Translation: India has more honors kids than America has kids. Did you know? The top 10 in-demand jobs in 2010 did not exist in 2004. We're currently preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist using technologies that haven't been invented. In order to solve problems we don't even know are problems yet. The U.S. Department of Labor estimates today's learner will have 10 to 14 jobs by the age of 38. 1 in 4 workers has been with their current employer for less than a year. 1 in 2 has been there less than 5 years. Did you know? 1 out of 8 couples married in the U.S. last year met online. There are over 200 million registered users on MySpace. If MySpace were a country, it would be the 5th largest in the world, between Indonesia and Brazil. The #1 ranked country in broadband internet penetration is Bermuda. Number 19, the United States. Number 22, Japan. Did you know? We're living in exponential times. There are 31 billion searches on Google every month. In 2006, this number was 2.7 billion. To whom were these questions addressed, BG, before Google? The first commercial text message was sent in December 1992. Today, the number of text messages sent and received every day exceeds the total population of the planet. A market audience of 50 million. Radio, 38 years. TV, 13 years. Internet, 4 years. iPod, 3 years. Facebook, 2 years. The number of internet devices in 1984 was 1,000. 92 was 1 million. In 2008 is 1 billion. There are about 540,000 words in the English language. About 5 times as many as during Shakespeare's time. It's estimated that a week's worth of the New York Times contains more information than a person was likely to come across in a lifetime in the 18th century. It's estimated that 4 exabytes of unique information will be generated this year. That is more than the previous 5,000 years. The amount of new technical information is doubling every 2 years. For students starting a 4-year technical degree, this means that half of what they learn in their first year of study will be outdated by their 3rd year of study. NTT Japan has successfully tested a fiber optic cable that pushes 14 trillion bits per second down a single strand of fiber. That's 2,660 CDs or 210 million phone calls every second. It is currently tripling every 6 months and is expected to do so for the next 20 years. By 2013, a supercomputer will be built that exceeds the computational capabilities of the human brain. Predictions are that by 2049, a $1,000 computer will exceed the computational capabilities of the entire human species. Did you know? During the course of this presentation, 67 babies were born in the U.S. 274 babies were born in China. 395 babies were born in India. And 694,000 songs were downloaded illegally. So what does it all mean?
So now that you've seen that video and got some new information about how quickly the world is changing, does that make you think any differently about how you want to share information with other people and the sheer power and rapidity of the fact that information in our world is changing so quickly? I think it's really good food for thought in trying to keep everything in context.
Anyone have any guesses of who this fine gentleman is? You can forward ahead to the end of the presentation if you are correct, and your guess was Malcolm Knowles. Malcolm Knowles is considered to be the leader in adult learning, which is also known as andragogy. And his work has been used to assist educators and shift the idea of educating people to helping them learn. I think that his work is really fascinating and definitely worthy of discussion for a few minutes. So let's take a moment now and talk a little bit about the differences between pedagogy and andragogy. Pedagogy is what we think of when we consider sort of traditional teaching that occurs in our kiddos' classroom. And as I said, andragogy is really adult learning. So let's talk a little bit about what some of those differences might be in terms of thinking about the learner, for example. Well, in pedagogy, the learner is told what is to be learned. The learner is dependent. The learner is told how to learn, when to learn it, and is told by the teacher and society that they will be the ones to dictate these items of what, how, and when. Now in andragogy, the learner is considered to be self-directed and has more of the internal navigation, that internal locus of control of learning. And different people move toward self-direction at different rates. And adults have a need to move out of that traditional student role. And that's why sometimes it can be really hard making that shift from 12th grade into college or another adult learning situation. That concept of learner is transitory. So in pedagogy, if we talk about the role of the learner's experience, we sort of think of the learner as being a blank slate. The learner is assumed to be naive and has little to draw from in terms of their own experience. However, on the flip side of that, in andragogy, learners bring more meaning to the learning that occurs because their experience is seen as a positive. The learner's experience is valued, and that experience is seen as a resource. Where in pedagogy, the learner is really more of a sponge, soaking everything up, offering very little back out. In pedagogy, if we look at readiness to learn, learning occurs as a step-by-step progression. It's sort of that When is the learning taking place? You build upon the information step by step, whether you think you need it or not. Adult learners, however, their readiness to learn is really very strongly affected by sort of the mantra of, I'm going to learn it if I need it. I will learn it if it's of value to me. That's a big, distinct shift. The orientation to learning follows right along with that, where in pedagogy we tell our learners that it's fine, you may not need it now, but one day this will be useful to you. You'll use geometry someday. Get the information. In andragogy, the idea really is that I need this now. Or, if I don't need it now, getting this information is going to help me in some way. It's going to improve my quality of life. That may be economically. It may be in terms of job opportunities. It may be because it's something that I really do want to apply to learn. When we think about adult learning, there are some assumptions that are made. We have this idea of self-concept, where we're shifting from dependency of the learner to being a self-directed learner. And this is considered the point at which the learner psychologically really is becoming an adult, according to Malcolm Knowles. Experience in adult learning. The learner has a growing reservoir of experience that becomes an increasing resource for learning. Readiness to learn. The learner becomes oriented to the tasks that go along with that learner's roles. The orientation to learning. Learning becomes immediately applicable, as opposed to that delayed high school geometry, where you're saying, when am I ever going to use this? You need it now. And the motivation to learn has changed. Motivation to learn becomes more internal. Adult learners need to know why they need to know something before they learn it. Using the mantra of, you'll need it someday, isn't going to work for an adult learner. Make it relevant to me and make me want to learn it. So why do we really care about this anyway? Why is this such a big deal? Well, because out in the adult world, we are trying to share and communicate our vision with others. And we need to do this effectively. We need to know that our message is being heard. We also have opportunities to learn professionally. This isn't necessarily just something that's happening in the classroom. And we want to provide classroom experiences. We want to provide trainings. We want to share information that is meaningful to those that we're sharing it with. It's also very important because we are experiencing new frontiers in terms of technology and the way that allows us to communicate with each other, as expressed in the video that we just watched. Technology is giving us new ways of teaching adults and for adult learning. And the other reason, which is pretty much inherent, and it's, you know it when you see it. You know when information is being shared in a good way. You know when it's working. You know when somebody is getting the point that you're trying to make. You can see it in a classroom because the students are engaged. You see it in a training when people aren't falling asleep. Conversely, when everybody's got their heads on the table, when people are having lots of side conversations or on their cell phones, it ain't working then. So it's really important to know who your audience is. In case you didn't know it, people are very different. One of the most important things that you can do is know who your audience is. And sometimes people think that that can be getting to know you exercises, let's go around the room kind of thing. Not necessarily. What can be useful is asking people to write down a little bit about their background and what it is that they're hoping to get out of the experience. Most of us know about adults as learners based on what we've learned from convenience samples. A lot of what we've learned comes from young, middle-class, white college students. So it's not necessarily going to apply over to the learning that's going on in classrooms around the country, that not necessarily going to apply to trainings that you're doing. So the statistics that are out there aren't necessarily helping us a whole lot. So if we're thinking about the age of your learners, is this college students that we're talking about, or is this an 80-year-old college student? They're out there. Two of the main changes that come with age are decreased speed and less energy. And that's decreased speed in terms of what can be applied to learning, and less energy in terms of just stamina for learning. Decreased speed means the actual speed of information processing, how quickly you react and process information. You're on the downhill slide once you pass age 16, sorry to tell you. Also with aging is that less energy, but the good news is that even though you might slow down, it's still pretty rapid. Is that a contradiction? Well, kind of, but here's how it works. Suppose you're asked to read a book and you're going to be tested on it the next day. If you're 18, you can read that book pretty quick and pull out details. At 48, you aren't going to read it as fast, but you're going to be better at pulling out the important stuff. So your experience is helping you compensate for that decreased speed. So the accommodations based on age-based instruction are really good practices. Okay? There's also some differences between the genders that have been described, but I think the important thing to think about here is the fact that the differences between the genders are decreasing. And that's happening because both men and women are being afforded the same kinds of opportunities. I could talk more about that, but I'm afraid that you might actually start to doze off on me, so we won't do that. Motivation of your audience is also really, really important, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that coming up on this next slide. So I'm going to come back to that. But the attitudes and beliefs about learning are also critical. Cultural differences are just starting to get studied. So what do we expect from our learners who are diverse in terms of culture? There is a notion of verve versus a respectful silence. And you can see that happening if you look at diversity of cultures in different learning arenas. Motivation. Let's take a little crash course here in motivation. What motivates us? What makes us do the things that we do? Well, that comes back to what is our motivation. And I think this is really fascinating stuff. So there's different ways to think about motivation. You can think about motivation in terms of, is it intrinsic or is it extrinsic? Are you motivated because you want to do something, or is there some sort of an external reward that comes along with it? That would be the extrinsic. Extrinsic for external. Intrinsic, internal. So extrinsic, if you take this course at your local college, you are going to get a pay raise. Which would that be? What kind of motivation are you experiencing there? Well, that would be extrinsic motivation. If you are taking a community college class in introductory painting, you might be doing that for intrinsic reasons unless it's tied to your job. If it's something that is not work related, you just want to do it for your own enjoyment, that would make you intrinsically motivated. Self-esteem and self-efficacy are also tied to motivation. So does everybody remember the difference between self-esteem and self-efficacy? Well, really quick, self-esteem. What do you see when you look in the mirror? How do you feel about yourself? It's more of a global, overall measure. Self-efficacy is domain-specific. What's your confidence in your ability to do something? You may have low self-esteem about yourself overall, but you may have very high self-efficacy in terms of your skills in calculus. You may be really good at it and highly motivated, but getting those grades of A may not translate into you having an improved self-esteem about yourself for whatever reasons. Self-efficacy is something that can be increased by setting small goals before considering long-term goals. Goals should also be specific. People who set their own goals can also increase self-efficacy. So if you think about something like a staff evaluation, if the staff member sets their own goals for how to make an improvement in something, chances are better that that's actually going to happen. Makes sense, really, because if you're invested in what it is that you're doing, you've bought into it, you're taking ownership of that. Really important. Expectancy value theory. This one's my favorite. So this turns motivation into a mathematical equation. Motivation equals our expectation of a result and, or multiplied by, the value we place upon that thing. So, the example that I'll use here is, what is my motivation for cleaning the house? Well, I'll tell you, I'm not that good of a housekeeper. And I don't like vacuuming because getting into the corners is really hard. We have dogs, there's fur everywhere. The vacuum cleaner is complicated. I have a hard time using the vacuum cleaner. My expectation of success with the vacuum, not that high. I've had some bad experiences. So when I combine that with my values around a clean house, well, I honestly can say that I place a higher value on being outdoors, doing things with my family, going out and working with my horses. That's where my values are. That's how I want to be spending my time. I do not value the time that I spend cleaning. Sure, a clean house is nice, I get that. But if I combine my low expectation of success along with my low value for house cleaning, my motivation is going to be what? Really, really low. Now, conversely, if I consider my motivation to do something that I really enjoy and place a high value on, I'm going to be more likely and be more motivated to do so, particularly if I expect that it's something that I'm pretty good at doing anyway. So that's how those things work together. And I think it's really interesting because you can think about that in terms of lots of different environments. You can think about it in terms of student success. You can think about it in terms of working on a team with other people, professionally, personally. It just really seems to hit home in a lot of different ways. Another way to look at motivation is through one's goal orientation. And people can be said to have different kinds of goal orientation. Is your goal orientation mastery? Do you really just want to learn something just so that you can say that you've mastered it? Or are you more of a performance avoid kind of person? You want to do something well because you don't want to look dumb. Are you a performance approach person? You really want to learn how to do something because you want people to see how smart you are. You want people to see how well you can perform. So it's sort of a more complicated sort of internal mechanism for why we do the things that we do. And the really interesting thing about this is that if you think about it in terms of if you are putting a training together, if you're putting a class syllabus together, you're putting an outline together for a lecture, you can actually change the orientation of somebody who may initially be there because they want to learn to master something. But if you're a real stickler about the details, if you're really focused on those really subtle, small things, and you're going to test on that, you can change that person's motivation. They can decide, I don't think I'm going to be able to master this. The best that I'm going to be able to do is to try to keep from looking like I'm a fool. That's really sad if that's going to happen in a learning environment. You don't want that kind of learning. That's not what you're after. So it shows you how powerful an approach can be. And I think that we're all aware, really, at some level, that people learn differently, right? Some examples of different learning styles. Someone may be a visual learner, do better with images and spatial awareness. Someone may be an auditory learner and use what's being spoken or said as a way of learning. Someone could be a verbal learner, taking in the words and reading, seeing things on the board, on the smart board, looking at things on blackboard. A physical learner may want to do something, actually having that tactile involvement. A logical learner, more mathematical. Interpersonal learning style, more social. Intrapersonal is more of a one-on-one learner. Let me be self-directed and do it on my own. In this cartoon, just a little example of how some learners are really starting to self-advocate for themselves. And this student says, as we start a new school year, Mr. Smith, I just want you to know that I'm an abstract sequential learner and trust that you'll conduct yourself accordingly. Now, this isn't something that we would expect to see in traditional pedagogy, is it? But as learners are shifting and transitioning into adult learners, we do expect more of that self-direction and self-awareness as well. But how much better prepared are we as learners when we understand what our learning styles are and can advocate that whenever we are in a learning environment? In the classroom, we've sort of been conditioned to think about intelligence as being one's IQ, or another word for that being book smart. But Howard Gardner proposed the theory of multiple intelligences, which I really like. And this also really just goes along with the notion that people are intelligent in a variety of ways. And just as learners learn differently, we all bring different strengths to the learning environment and are intelligent in different ways. So here are just some of the examples of that, of being a logical learner, being spatially intelligent, introspective or intrapersonal, naturalistic, mathematical, verbal, bodily. Just a very different way to think about what it means when we think about a learner and what is intelligence and what is the learner bringing to the table. So we've thought about our sheep. We've thought about what's not effective in a learning environment. Just to re-encapsulate some of that. Another idea of what isn't effective in a learning environment is too much information. Just that overload. We all have seen it. You know it. There comes a point when you can't take in anymore, and learning no longer becomes effective. If the information is not relevant to you, if the instructor can't make it connect to the learner, it's not going to be effective. If instruction is not enthusiastic, if it's apparent from the outset that the instructor doesn't want to be there as much as the learner doesn't want to be there, then it's not going to be an effective situation. And going along with that, the idea of no emotion. Connect oneself to what you are sharing with others. It's really difficult to expect someone to take joy in what it is that's being shared if there is no joy in the presentation. So if there is no connection of the presenter to the content, if it's very clear that the presenter's knowledge of what's being presented maybe only goes as deep as the words on the notes page or as deep as the bullet on the PowerPoint slide, that's not an authentic situation for a learner. And also, learning is not going to be effective if there's not enough time to practice. It takes a long time to master anything. And here's an example of helping us think about what it takes to master a domain. Take a look at this slide. I think this is pretty cool. This is the work of Anders Ericsson. And he studied people who did many different things well. And he was looking at performers, instrumentalists. In this case, he was looking at violinists and pianists. And he was looking at very young, up through about age 20, and looking to see how accomplished they were. And I'm not sure if you could tell on the slide or not. Hopefully you can. We've got professionals, we've got best experts, good experts, and least accomplished experts. And for pianists, we've got amateurs. Now, this chart shows that our amateur pianists are the ones who have got the least amount of accumulated practice. And who has the most accumulated practice? Well, it's actually a combination of professionals and best experts. If you look at the number of hours that they have spent practicing their craft, in this case the violin, we are at over 10,000 hours. And so these are the professionals and best experts. They've spent the most time. So they are obviously the most accomplished experts. And this practice is paying off. I think that's really what I'd like you to get across in this slide. Let's talk for a few minutes about the conditions of learning. Under what circumstances can learning best occur? And I've got a few here that I'd like you to keep in mind as you're thinking about those conditions of learning. And the first is about respect. Everyone has worth. Make certain that you respect the learners. You approach your learners with positive regard and respect consistently. Active learning. Engage and involve your participants. Allow for some dialogue to take place. Active learning isn't about just listening. And this is some ideas that are adapted from active learning, creating excitement in the classroom by Charles Bonwell. And Bonwell says engagement is imperative. There should be an emphasis on developing skills. There should be an emphasis on the learner's values and attitudes. Active learning also means being motivated to learn, getting feedback while learning. And active learning means that higher order thinking is happening. And by higher order thinking, we're talking about things like analyzing and evaluating. So active learning is crucial. The materials and the learning that's taking place also must be relevant. And a good way to know what's relevant for your learners is to ask them. Identify the needs ahead of time. You can pass around an information sheet and ask your learners, what is it that they want to get out of this course or this training? I know that's not possible all the time, but it can be really, really helpful to make sure that you're on target and meeting the needs of your learners. Because by doing so, you're also addressing the next bullet point, which is that learners accept the responsibility. So by involving them and deciding what some of the focus areas of the content might be, you're also giving them that responsibility for their own learning. That's very empowering. Which leads to self-direction and having a self-directed learner. Learners can be self-initiated. There should be an expectation of motivation on behalf of the learner so that he or she is really empowered to navigate the content that you're presenting. So additionally, some other conditions of learning is that you want to make sure that the materials that you're sharing are building upon what it is that you've already presented. So you're creating a solid foundation. So you want to integrate concepts so that you can review. You build on the foundation of content so you can always go back to your starting point and again show the relevance of what you're covering later in the course or in the training. And we need to make sure that the learning environment itself is a positive one. And that means both the physical environment and the attitudinal environment. Is it 100 degrees in the room? Do you have students sitting so close to each other that they're arm to arm? Is the room too small for what you've got going on? How can you address those issues to show your learners that you care about their environment and that you want them to have a good experience? It makes a huge difference. And that part leads really to that positive attitudinal learning environment as well. Sometimes what I like to do is I'll just take a minute before I start presenting material or introducing some new concepts, and just ask everybody where they're at. We go around the room. Tell me in one word how you're feeling right now. And it really can be pretty telling. You get some interesting responses, and sometimes that does help me decide how it is I'm going to approach the day. You also want to make sure that you reinforce what is being taught. Allow for review. Allow learners to practice what they're learning, and allow them to self-evaluate their own progress. Get a sense for themselves if they're on top of the material or if they're having some trouble. And to that end, also small groups. Small groups can really be helpful. Let learners share with each other. And this also is another way to reinforce what they're learning, and it reinforces the fact that you can not only be a learner, but you can also help to teach. So it helps with some power differentials that may be going on. And there's, an asterisk whenever we talk about small groups, because there are some for whom small groups are totally not effective. And once we get to talk about universal design for learning a little bit, we'll talk some more about that small group issue. And here we are, universal design for learning. Yay, we made it. So really, everything that we've been talking about brings us to this notion of universal design for learning. Universal design for learning really gives us a solid framework. Universal design for learning is a scientifically valid framework that guides educational practice. And the practice provides flexibility in the way that information is presented, in the way that students respond or demonstrate their knowledge and skills, and in the way that students are engaged. All of those areas have flexibility in them. And as a result of this, Universal Design for Learning, or UDL as I'll call it, or UDL as it's known, also reduces barriers in instruction, provides appropriate accommodations, supports, and challenges, and maintains high achievement expectations for all students, including students with disabilities and students who are limited English proficient. Now, this definition that I've just shared with you is actually taken from the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008. And I think this is really powerful language. And the language in and of itself, I think, is also very accessible for us to understand. And it inherently makes sense. So you can consider UDL to be a broad set of strategies that does away with the one-size-fits-all idea of teaching. It's about flexibility, as we said, and it's about eliminating barriers in learning that may be completely unintentional. It benefits a broad array of learners, and we've talked about learners and the different things that they bring and the different needs that they have and the different strengths that they bring as well. So we could be talking about benefit for students who might have difficulty with a traditional didactic approach, all the way to those high achieving students who might be considered gifted and talented. So, the students who are having trouble, all the way to the students who just may be bored or you may not be effectively reaching. From the start, UDL is creating materials that is an attempt to meet the needs of all learners. And that's a key point. We're talking about employing UDL practices from the very beginning. It's not about retrofitting. It's about thinking about it at the outset. Not to say you can't come back in and revamp the way that you're doing a course or the way that you're providing a training. It's just that it's much easier to implement it from the outset rather than to come back in after the fact. So like I said, UDL benefits a wide array of learners. And we're talking about adult learners. We're talking about people who are busy. We're also talking about people for whom English may not be a first language. And also, I think it's critical to think about the fact that UDL strategies also are going to benefit the presenter, the instructor, the faculty, the person who is sharing the materials, because that person's presentation style may be inconsistent with the audience member's preferred learning style. Because as we've also discussed, your audience is diverse. You're going to have people with different needs, and you are going to have a very tough time meeting all of those needs if you don't use some strategies to ensure that you are including everyone. So it really is pretty powerful stuff. The elements of UDL. We're talking about the content. You can impact the content, which we'll talk more about. The instruction, the way that you're presenting that content. Assessment, how you are testing knowledge of that content. And additionally, the environment in which the learning is taking place. So, kind of in a nutshell, UDL, Universal Design for Learning, it's just about really good teaching. So let's drill down a little bit here into the principles of UDL. And really there are three main principles that we're talking about. The first one is multiple means of representation. And this is really the what of learning. How is material being presented? How is it being shared? Learners differ in the way that they perceive and comprehend information that's presented to them. Learners may require very different ways of approaching content. One learner may simply grasp information quicker or more efficiently through visual or auditory means rather than through printed text. Also, learning and transfer of learning takes place when multiple representations are used. And remember, we talked about that earlier. How much do you retain of what you see, of what you hear, of what you see and hear, of what you do? It all fits. And why this happens really is because it's allowing students to make those connections within and between the concepts. In short, there's not one means of representation that's going to be optimal for all learners, but providing options for that representation is really important. Ultimately, this means there's a need to present information in different ways. And examples of that would be to, as in this illustration, where we have the instructor who is doing some diagramming of elements. It may mean clarifying the symbols and the structure of what's created there on the board. It may mean using multiple methods. It may mean having 3D models that students can manipulate. It may mean doing a podcast of the presentation and making that available for students as well. Multiple. And while we're talking about multiple means of representation, it doesn't just mean in the classroom. It also reflects the materials that are used to support the learning and the concepts that are being presented. So that means your syllabus. If we're talking about a college course where students receive information about what the expectations are via syllabus, then think about the structure and the way that the information is conveyed in the syllabus. And there are really detailed examples and illustrations of
syllabi that show good UDL practices. And it might be something as simple as when the instructor shows information about where their office is located. So it might not just be the address on the syllabus, but also an image of the building, an image of a map of how to get there. Those little things can make a huge difference in the learning experience. Utilizing multimedia. Oftentimes now courses also have a Blackboard component or another online learning tool that is used even when the course is a face-to-face course, because it supplements the ways that the students are getting the information and choosing to access the information. And the way that the materials are presented need to be culturally responsive. You need to recognize the needs, again, of the students who you are teaching. And we talked a little bit about documents using UDL principles. Lots of really just simple ideas that are very straightforward and don't take a lot of effort to implement. Moving on to the second principle of UDL, and that is around multiple means of expression. And this is the how of learning. How does the student express what has been learned? And again, I feel like I'm repeating myself. This is about providing options. Give students choice in showing what they know. Vary up the methods for responding. Optimize the use of technology when you're doing so. And by doing this, you are respecting the learner by providing those choices. You're saying, okay, you can submit a paper, or you can submit an audio file, or you can create an online wiki. There are different ways that you can show to me what you have learned. The third principle of UDL is multiple means of engagement. This is the why. This is the how do we engage the learners? How do we motivate them? Well, guess what I'm going to say? I'm going to say we give them choices. We make it relevant. We minimize those distractions that threaten their ability to take in the materials. And we also have to realize that learners really differ markedly in the ways in which they can be engaged or motivated to learn. And some of this can, again, be cultural as well. And there's a variety of other factors. Some learners are highly engaged by spontaneity and novelty, while others are disengaged or even frightened by those aspects. So if you try to pull someone out of the learning environment to come up and help you demonstrate an idea, that can backfire terribly if that student has such a fear of speaking in front of other people. So you need to know these kinds of things. That student may prefer to take information in quietly and not be engaged in, we talked about small groups before. Small groups can really be a negative for someone who does not work well under those conditions. Some students prefer to work alone. So really, the important thing here is to know there's not one means of engagement that's going to work for all learners in all contexts. So it's really important to have multiple means to engage your students. Okay, we've talked a lot about learners, conditions for learning, different types of learners, universal design for learning. Where does this apply? To whom am I speaking? Well, I am speaking to a broad swath of folks out there, because even if you think it doesn't apply to you, it really does. If you are in the classroom, if you are faculty, if you're an instructor, if you're a lecturer, if you're providing trainings, and this doesn't need to be in the higher education environment.
This is about sharing information with people in a setting where people come together to learn. And that could be in committees, that could be in subcommittees, that could be in work groups, anywhere that you're working with more than one person and ideas need to be shared. If you're developing resources, multiple means of expression can be so valuable in terms of ensuring that your message is getting across to as many people as you are hoping. Because sometimes that message can really get missed if you don't take into account the fact that the people who may be receiving your message have various needs when they're doing so. So, in short, if you're involved in sharing information with anyone, this applies to you. So, what do I want you to get out of this? I want you to really consider your learners. I want you to remember that we must respect our learners. They are the reason that we are there sharing information. And we have to engage them, but we must be engaged ourselves. And we have to find the joy in what it is that we're doing and be able to convey that to those that we're sharing it with. Because if you, as a presenter, as a lecturer, as a trainer, aren't engaged yourself and aren't vested yourself in what it is you're doing, how can you expect to motivate other people to take in what you're sharing? Because you have an important message. And you have to think about the best ways to get that out to others. So let us not be sheep. Let us recognize that we have a lot of power in our ability to help people gain information. And just one really short little anecdote. I want you to think about a conversation between a builder and an architect. The architect is designing a retirement village and instructs the builder to make the floors warm and resilient. The builder responds, "Well, for whom should I build floors cold and hard?" To that same end, I want you to think of yourself as the builder, because you are building. You're building lives, you're building knowledge, and you're building a learning community that has respect for all the learners who are there. Here are some resources that will also be available to you in a document. I've used some of these resources today, some of them I have not, but all of them are going to be working links that you can click on to get more information about universal design for learning. And if you have any questions or you want any kind of follow-up, if you want to continue our dialogue, please feel free to contact me, Kathy Shepard Jones. My contact information is on this slide. 859-257-8104 is my phone number. My email is kjone@uky.edu. Thank you very much for your time.